Greetings. Welcome to the 7th lecture in Sealaska Heritage Institute's series entitled, We Have Lived in Southeast Since Time Immemorial. I am Chuck Smythe, Director of the Culture and History Department. SHI has started construction of its arts campus in downtown Juneau, which will expand opportunities for education and art. If you are interested in making a donation to the arts campus, please visit sealaskaheritage.org/campus. The title of today's lecture is The Tsimshianic Language Family, Its Ancestry and Distant Relatives. As you watch the lecture, we invite you to submit questions in the chat box on the YouTube. Professor Tarpent has graciously agreed to answer questions at the end of her presentation. A native of France, Dr. Tarpent came to the US to study linguistics, earning an MA at Cornell University before moving to Canada and pursuing additional linguistic studies at Simon Fraser University. In 1977, she had the opportunity to participate in the Nisga'a Language Revitalization Program and moved to the Nass Valley, working there full-time for a total of 8 years. Meanwhile, she enrolled in the PhD program at the University of Victoria and wrote a grammar of the language as her dissertation in 1989. She later taught at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax before retiring in 2007 while continuing her research. In 1991, she was able to contact the last speaker of the Southern Tsimshian language, Mrs. Violet Niesloss, and to work with her at her home in Klemtu during several summers. This work was important both for the preservation of Southern Tsimshian and for comparative historical work on the Tsimshianic language family and its potential relatives. Dr. Tarpent.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, I'm here.
Please begin.
I would like to start with a traditional greeting in the Nisga'a language. Sim gigat, sigidim hanak, simlu am qadi, will hooks skaptis, asama sat kuna. I'd stop there. It would be hard for me at this point to remember enough of the language. Anyway, what I said was, chief ladies, I'm very happy to be here among you on this fine day. So, first I'll tell you about something about the family. First, where is it spoken? Okay. So this part of a map is not quite north-south, but more or less. It's an Nisga'a language and its close relatives, Ikitxan, and two kinds of Tsimshian. Where you see in the Nisga'a portion here, you see some rivers. And where the edge or the limit of the map on the left side, that is the border between Canada and the United States, namely Alaska. And the traditional territory of the Nisga'a actually includes a little bit of the state of Alaska. The border is in between, but the Nisga'a in earlier times also had both sides of the river or inlet there. And that means, of course, from the Tlingit territory, in which Sealaska is located. So Nisga'a has one river, the Nash River, and you can see that it, as it goes into the sea, it joins with another river, goes into Gitxsan territory. The prefix Git means people of, and Xan is the name of that river. Now, when you see Tsimshian, there are actually two kinds. The one which has the most people is close to the sea. It has, like most of the coast in that area, it isn't a very smooth kind of coast. The southern part, where until 2013, there was still a speaker, is actually much lower, much further south. If you see where it says Heihais, H-A-I-H-A-I-S, you can see that the border between languages goes through islands. And you see on the southern side a kind of a triangular island. Just a minute. This is where Southern Tsimshian was once spoken. And there is one town on this island called Klemtu. It's called Klemtu officially. It used to be the word Klemdeak. And since English speakers could not say this word, they shortened it to Klemtu. The population of Klemtu used to be evenly distributed between Tsimshian speakers, Southern Tsimshian, and the Wakashan speech of the Heihais, and further down the Bela Bela. And the origin of the Klemtu Tsimshian were in one of another island on the coast, further on the coast. The reason there is because at one point in the 19th century, the island was chosen by a steamship company to have workers there, loggers there, providing wood for the steamships. And some of the outer island Tsimshian came there too, and also some of the neighbors speaking Wakashan languages, such as the Riris. And for various reasons, some of the Tsimshians of Klemtu left to go settle somewhere else where there was, at that time, a mission. And only a few people were left in Klemtu who spoke Southern Tsimshian. And the lady I worked with, Violet Nislas, was one of the few who were left there. I'm going to show you a picture of her. Here is Violet Nislas, who at that time were in her late 70s. And what she's holding is a big piece of cedar bark, inner cedar bark, which she would use to make little baskets, such as this one. Unfortunately, she was quite old. She passed away in 2013 at the age of 99. I was very lucky to have known her and been able to learn some of her language. I say some of because by that time I knew a fair amount of Niska. I could hold not too complex conversations, but I didn't spend as much time, of course, trying to learn Southern Tsimshian. All right, let's go on. This map comes from books about the natives' cultures and languages. The yellow color is for the languages belonging to the Penutian, so-called Penutian phylum. So the Tsimshianic family, not everybody shares that conviction, but you'll see why it is quite convincing. When you see the position of the Tsimshianic family surrounded by other languages which are completely different from it, and then the next Penutian language is the Chinook one, which is in the Columbia Valley. That's quite a trip to go from the Alaska Panhandle to go to the Columbia Valley. And afterwards, some of them are, some of the Penutian languages are closer to each other, but we'll get to that. Okay, let me, where do we go from here? Sorry, I find it a little hard to get from one. Okay, here. So this is about the Tsimshianic family. How do we know that these languages form a group? You have a lot of resemblances. Some of it vocabulary, and some of it other elements of the language. Where are we? Okay, as examples of vocabulary, CD meaning Tsimshian, which is the one which has the largest area of speech. Tsimshian and Southern Tsimshian. Gad and Niska pronounced the same. Gad. Gidksan, depending on the exact area, it could be get or get. All these mean mostly man, including boy, and also as a plural, people. And when you see a word like a name like Gitksan or Gitamat, it means people of whatever it is. In the case of Gitksan, it's the people of the Skeena River. Here is another one. Same thing, southern. This kind of Gitksan, meaning woman, especially, including a girl. All of them on rivers which have a lot of migratory fish, especially salmon. There is one word, horn. How do you catch horn? Well, mostly with a net. Tsimshian, Niska Gitsan, Ahat. Southern Tsimshian, Ahat. Not a long vowel, but a short vowel with the H. Nevertheless, it's obvious that that must be originally the same word. And here is a verb. The two Tsimshian say ya. Niska and Gitsan say ye. To walk or to go in the singular. But you also have, I'm sorry, this is a little hard to manipulate. Okay. So in vocabulary, you also have a number of differences. This one meaning dog has, as opposed to us or us, meaning a dog. Nevertheless, these words are similar to each other. If we were going a little farther, then there would be a lot more differences. Okay, now here's how words or sentences are put together. This is very important to know if you're trying to find how the languages are related, to not just to compile a list of words, but also how are the words used. So here are some simple simple words and sentences. For instance, how to say, how are you? Southern, they will have one. How are you? I am okay. I am fine. Ami will have you. Sorry. Ami will have you. Niska, how are you? Dash will have willing. Answer, am will have willing. Now you can see that the basic formation of the clause is the same. You have a very similar word at the beginning. Next, another word, will I, which is the one meaning how, but not as a question. And then that will I willing. I am will I willing. Now you can see that the verbs are not quite the same, but in the sentence which has you, the verb ends in N. The answer has I. Ami will have walu. Will have willy. Okay. Here, the two words which have, the two sentences which has I have a different ending. N is for you, in the singular, and for the word meaning I, you don't have an extra word as in English, but you have it at the end of the word, of the verb. Definitely willing, N means you. Amula, willy. The I means I. In Southern, you have N at the end of the word, okay? But one difference between that word and the counterparts, there is an L, Amula walu. In Niska, you also have an N, but it isn't wal, but it will, Amula willy. So here you have how to say I or you. The reason why you get one and not walen, which you would expect if you have walu for I, it should be walen. In fact, there's something that happens in the two maritime varieties, the two that are called Tsimshianic, is that when you have an L followed by a consonant, the L disappears. So you don't get waln or walin, but it's just, you skip the L, one, the L. Okay, here's something, well, it isn't really more difficult, but simple sentences again. Here you want to say, what did you eat? And answer, I ate fish. Southern, gooey goblin, what did you eat? I ate fish. Honey gobble. Niska, a gosh gibbon. Horn gibbon. Now you already know the word horn. You already know that for you, the verb ends in N. And for I, Southern has U, Niska has E. And something else I haven't mentioned yet. If you say gooey goblin, honey goblin, you have the sound E there for both. And this is called a connective. It connects various elements of the sentences. Now, Niska does not have this E in either question or answer, but it has what's written HL, which is the sound sh, sh, a gush gibbon, hon sh, gibby. And another difference between the two, the word meaning eat, to eat something. In Southern, it's gob. Hui gobe, honi gob. In this case, it's gib. Gibbon, hon gibby. So you can see here, these languages are very similar, but they're not identical, and there are a number of differences. Okay, let's go somewhere else. Now, when you have languages which are so similar, so not identical, you usually will have consistent patterns of correspondences between sounds. If they're consistent, it probably means that the languages have a common ancestor. If you just adopt a word from another language, or even more than one, but separately, your correspondences are not consistent. So here we'll see in a number of correspondences. Okay, just a minute. Okay, let's start with something simple. You can see on the top, CT, coast, ST, southern, N or G, Niska, Gitxen. Niska and Gitxen are almost the same. Okay, even though they have a lot of different vocabulary, not basic vocabulary, but other vocabulary. So here's the word meaning water or to drink. Anyways, NG means is and is kind of gets sent. When it's different, then I have both. Okay, axe, mean water or to drink. Here's the word for day, which I used in my little greeting, which at the end had amasa, amasa, good day. And here is a word. There is H there because it could be said one way or the other, but usually, say in day, in everyday language, people would just say sa. In a formal occasion, they're more likely to say sa. And Southern, it's always sa. Here's another one where all three have the same. This means to sit or to exist in the singular. Here's a fishnet again. This is going really fast. Okay. At. Now here's something interesting. In two of the languages, the word begins with in the next one with m. And it means to button something. And what do you do if you button something? you push the button into a slit. And here are words that I think are using the same metaphor. With a P in the two Tsimshians. In Niska and Gitxan, well, Niska is Ma. And then quite often, Gitxan has shorter vowels. Anyway, Al in one language, one family, subfamily, and Ma. How do you make a dugout canoe? Well, you have to make an incision and then you have to spread the trunk, just as like you when you're buttoning a sweater or something. Okay, now a little further down, things are getting complicated. You see in Niskra and Southern Tsimshian, the verb tahu, it means to sweep, like to sweep the floor. But in Coast Tsimshian, this letter U with 2 dots on top. Those of you who know German, you might know that writing a U like that, it isn't U, but it becomes U. In Coast and Southern Tsimshian, this spelling doesn't mean U, it means U. It might sound a little, it might sound similar, but it's really quite different. And among other things, if you use the German U, you have to push out your lips a little bit. But in the Tsimshian languages, you spread your lips. Okay. And it looks like tach and have nothing to do with each other except the meaning. But there are a number of cases where you have that kind of correspondence. Ach in one language and in another one. Okay. Okay, let's go a little further down. Now words meaning little in the singular. Just a moment. Okay, in Coast Tsimshian, it could be shku or shkwa. And in Southern, it's always shku. In this case, shku gives a shkui rather than shkwa. It means little. What's the typical little? It's children. And here, under N and G, we're meaning children in the plural, not the singular, but the plural. In this case, if you want to say my children, but in the Tsimshians, it's here you have at the beginning a group of consonants which are not obvious how to pronounce. Shki is bad enough. Is really hard. Here is a word meaning father. Where is father? Sorry. Okay, let's look here then. The word meaning hair on your head. at the top. Coast Tsimshian, Raus, Raus. Southern Raus, the U is also there, where you would have Au, Au. Say Al. But in this case, it's Ris, okay, which is more pronounceable. Anyways, the E in this, there are quite a number of cases where if you have E in the middle of the word, in Nesca or Gixen, you get all kinds of different things at the, in the Tsimshians. For instance, here the same thing. For me to say, how coast, southern how, and then in Nesca, he. Okay, and here's one which is very hard to say at the beginning. Coast or southern for non-processed Ulicans. Bah, bah. Nesca, in the middle of a word, you don't say ou by itself, but in, for instance, si, si means to make or to prepare. Si ou, to do whatever you need to process, catch and process Ulicans. It's ou. Okay, here is an example with some examples with other what are called consonant clusters, where you have several consonants together. In it could mean a bush, a tree. It's something solid that you can, or that naturally has or carries, bears, etc. So if you wanted to say a berry bush, berries is ma. In Nisra, the berry bush is skranma. Skranma. In coast, skranma. But southern, tsran. Tsranma. Okay. And this is quite common with these languages where you have more consonants in southern. For instance, the next one. If you want to say in Niska, this is funny looking, this is ugly, or somebody, it's aski. But in southern, it's atsk, atsk. So you have T, S, not just S. And of course, you have the U, which is more common in southern than in the other one, the other languages. I'm sorry, I'm not used to this yet. And here's another case where you have different, quite a lot of packed together consonants. How to say to be clean? In this sax, CT, they don't have at the end, just k. So clean is sax. But in southern, it's more complex. Tjatsk, tjatsk, tjatsk. Anyway, so when you do this, you know, going through hundreds of words, little by little, you can see the most common correspondences, and then you can try to say, okay, what could these differences come from? Where do they come from? Not in the just saying, well, they have been spoken for a long time, and then the people got separated, and each tribe or culture behave differently and ended up saying things differently. Well, this is a general thing. But if you say you want to reconstruct what was a probable common ancestor, then you have to go through, okay, now how do you get to Tjaksk, to Saksk only? That sort of thing. Anyway, so I gave you some idea about the Tsimshianic languages. Now, what is its place? Here is a map that shows you, see, all the yellow territories are all speaking or used to speak Penutian languages. So I wrote here, I can't see, I think that the people who are watching this can see what's on the right, but I can't, there's other things there. Anyway, you can see here the Pacific coast, which has, or used to have, a lot of different languages. This is something which is quite common in the world, where you have, say, a prairie, a large flat expanse. You tend to have the same language throughout. Or if you have more than one, they are very similar to each other. And this is the case, for instance, with Dene. It is the case with Cree, and quite a number of them spoken in the continent, on the continent of North America. But when you have a coast, especially one that is very, very, not only very varied, but which has mountains or cliffs, anyway, which is hard to get from one place to another, unless you take a boat, you tend to have many languages, and many of them, many language families. So this is what you have in this particular map. We highlighted the Penutian languages, and I'll tell you afterwards what that means. But you can see that they don't go very far into the interior of the continent. Why? Because not only because it's hard to get from one place to another by land, but also because people who live on the coast, there's usually quite a bit to eat, to survive, because you have not only fish or seals or large animals, but you also have, if you're not able to take a boat, you can always walk on the beach, and many beaches, as you well know, in Alaska, you have animals that live kind of at the intersection of the sea and the land. So it's possible for small populations to maintain themselves because they have enough to eat and survive on the coast. So you can see here that the only place where you have a lot of bigger territories are not right on the coast, but they are in in California, they have flat land. They have large valleys in the interior of California. But as you go up further north, then you have more small areas and a lot of different languages. Okay, so the Tsimshianic family is surrounded by other languages, and regionally they are a small. They're fairly small. So, you know, as linguists, when you start to study languages, say, well, is this language related to any others, and where can I find it? And this is where we get into the Penutian. Okay, just a minute. Okay. Now, when Europeans, especially English, came to the continent, and before them, the Spanish, you know, most of the southern US was Spanish speaking at one point. Anyway, people who had to deal with or wanted to native people in different places, a lot of them, especially missionaries or traders, etc. People learned language. So it was known very early that there were lots of different languages. And it was quite obvious that some were spoken on a very wide area, like the prairies, and others in tiny little places. So the people, linguists, were interested in classifying these languages and seeing which ones fit together and others not. So what did you get? In the 19th century, people identified approximately, give or take one or two, 60, not 60 languages, but 60 language families, some quite big and some really small. So they thought, a lot of people said, well, 60 different language families, that's an awful lot. Probably it would be possible to reduce this and classify them better. And one reason is there were so many is that the 60 families, each one, it was kind of like showing that the Tsimshianic languages are very close to each other. But when you have, more different languages, we might have things in common, but not as many as to, say, to make it easy to learn each other's languages. So about 100 years ago, early 20th century, some languages, especially in California, where they had just opened universities and wanted to learn about the native cultures and the languages, etc. Anyway, so these two linguists, Kroger and Gibson, they were looking at California, and they saw, well, in that in this big area here, where the territories are fairly big, and even though the languages were not, I mean, there were already some families that were close to each other, so not very, very obvious. So they identified some of these languages here as sharing more features than would be you would expect if they were not related. And one of the criteria one problem was, how do we call that group of languages which could be related? And they didn't want to choose one, okay? Like in the word Tsimshianic, which is a new word. The reason is because it used to be called, people would say, oh, the Tsimshian language family. The Tsimshianic, well, that was not very greeted very well. So they didn't want to choose one of these languages and give its name to the whole group, or close name to the whole group. So they decided to use the words meaning the word two, the meaning two, one, two. And in one of the groups, subgroups, two was pen, another group, two was uti. So Penutian, Penutian was born there. And it was accepted because, why not? And then nobody could say, oh, we want to be, why didn't you use us, as the name? No, that didn't work like that. Okay, just a minute. So some of the features, many of these languages, not necessarily all in the group. The group itself, there were five different families. And one thing they had in common was difficult verb structure to actually, in terms of structure, not the actual words, but in terms of structure, these California languages had a structure similar to European languages with complex structures, such as French, Spanish, Italian, which are difficult. Any of you who have studied some of these languages, you have to. It's not easy to learn how to use verbs because of that. And another thing that they had in common, which was common among other native languages, in which you don't have a word such as to walk. you have to indicate what part of your body you use to walk. So in the verb, there might be a place that means to walk or to move, but or to go or something like that. But you have to add something like a leg or foot, and anything done by hand, you have the word hand within the body of the verb itself. And this type of thing is common in North American languages, but it was not something that was in the so-called Penutian ones. Then Edward Sapir, which is one of the absolutely top linguists of all time, he studied a number of languages, pushing up north from California. He worked in California for a while. But he, studying languages spoken further north, noticed that some of them had some of the same features. And according to him, the definition of Penutian was getting bigger and bigger. So it was no longer specific to some languages of California. And it turns out that at one point of his career, Sapir was working in Ottawa for the government. And as one of the perks, he happened to be around when a Niska delegation, one of the first to petition the government to with land claims. So here was somebody where people that spoke a language he had at least heard of, because by that time someone, Boaz, had studied especially Tsimshianic, but also a bit of Niska. So Sapir knew what Niska was supposed to be, and he met those people and worked with them for a few days. Anyway, at one time, Sapir published an article in which he reduced the number of native languages within North America from 60 to about 6. And these were not families, but what he called, each of them was called a phylum. Phylum is a word used in biology, especially classification of living beings. So Sapir thought Penutian languages and a bunch of, the other phyla, plural of phylum in Greek, he didn't think that, he thought that within each phylum, the languages must be related. Excuse me. But they were not similar, the languages were not similar enough for proving that they had a common ancestor. So here is summary of what it is. So, what did other linguists think of Sapir? When you have closely related languages, like some of the examples I gave you with the Tsimshianic languages, it's quite obvious. If you compare to languages of Europe, it's very obvious that say Spanish, Italian, French, and a few others must have a common ancestor. Now, this is known because of the long written history in Europe, but the idea is applicable to languages anywhere in the world. So if languages are closely related, it's usually quite obvious. But phylum, you have languages which are less similar than for the family. So how did Sapir, others react to Sapir's? Little by little, the various phyla were shut down, if I may say so. But with the Tsimshianic family, it has never been proven to be wrong, or it has never been officially proven to be right. One reason was because there is so much space between the Tsimshianic languages and the next one in the southern groups along the Pacific coast. I say, well, this is, it's over 1,000 miles, I think, you know, and so they can't be related to each other. In, you know, all the others are in California very close to each other, and then the others in between are along the coast, but between Chinook, which is the Columbia River, and the Alaska Panhandle, there's, you know, how could it possibly be related? So if you read, say, authoritative linguistic works about the classification of native languages, the Penutian phylum does not exist. I've been working, you know, on this for quite a few years, and I'm told that no, it doesn't exist. Well, Tsimshianic is called an isolate. Isolate means it's not related to anything else. Now, I'm not completely off, but the people who before, I mean, before I started to be interested in the problem, reading what other people had to say, who were trying to prove that indeed anyway, let's see. Okay, if Sapir said, okay, the Tsimshianic languages are related to Penutian, what did he mean? What did he see? In fact, there's very few. And most strikingly, what I call senior kin term. Kin term means family terms. So senior means people who are older than you. So it would be your parents, grandparents, uncle, aunt, etc. So the generation of your parents and grandparents and further back. Now, in Niska and the other languages, those words all start with an N. For instance, Niguat, meaning father. That's in Niska. And in Tsimshian, it would be Niguat. But Ni Bib, for uncle, Ni Ye, grandfather, Ni Tzitz, grandmother. Anyway, and then for most of these words, not Niguat, but for most of these words, if you say my grandfather, you'd have to say Ni Ye at the end. But if you call your grandfather, you'd say yeah. Okay, so without the ni prefix, same thing. For to call your uncle, you don't say ne bip, you say beep. For your grandmother, you don't say, you talk about her, netzit, but you call granny or something. It's deeds or didi. Okay, now, so you could say, okay, senior kin prefix is ni. But not if you are calling the person. You get the bare word. Now you read the dictionary of Wintu, which is a group of Californian languages, and you get exactly the same thing. The words, like bib, yeah, etc., the words are different, but they all use the ne prefix when talking about these people. And if you just call the person, then you don't use the prefix. How come this is happening, near the Alaska Panhandle and also in Northern California? This is very strange, isn't it? So this is one thing which strongly supports the hypothesis. But if that's all, you could say, well, maybe it's coincidence. But there's a lot more than coincidences. Now, in my case, I was working in an educational programs. So I was learning the Niska language, making teaching materials, etc. Meanwhile, I was also trying to see what the other languages were, the relatives of Niska. And then I saw at one point, well, all of these other people were full of errors and written things. Well, this shows that Tsimshianic and Chinook, blah, blah, blah. But none of those people had any actual contact with Tsimshianic languages. So I thought at one point, well, these people don't know. I've not learned any of these languages. I have learned at least Niska. I should really give my 2 cents worth in there. So I wrote this, presented this paper, and I was told later that this caused these other linguists 4 years later to call a workshop in Eugene, Oregon, where there are a number, or used to be a number of Penutian languages. So this were people at the University of Oregon decided to get together the linguists who were known to have studied languages which had been suspected of being Penutian, even if these were people who did not believe that they got together. And these people, after this workshop, we were told to each write an article, academic article, to give the state of the art. And when I started to study for this article, to write this article, I was sure that Sapir must have been wrong. And then when I started to study dictionaries and grammars of at least some of the other so-called possibly Penutian languages, I ended up thinking, well, looks like Sapir was right. So this totally changed my academic orientations, and I've been working on this since then. So why? So I will show you a little later why there is not just the idea of the senior kin term. This is only one feature. Why did nobody else really went as far as I have? So there were some obstacles. One was that most of the languages that Sapir identified as Penutian are at best endangered. A number of them were already dead, extinct by the time Sapir got there. Some had been studied by other people, other scholars before, so there are those people left their notes in some universities, or missionaries, or even ordinary people who were interested. Anyway, but to find documentation, enough documentation, it'd be quite difficult, if not impossible. Also, the training of linguists in the 20th century, people were expected to write dictionaries and grammars, but most of them, and this is true in general, in the 20th century, most linguists were trained in writing grammars, writing dictionaries, collect texts, etc. But they were not really well trained in the history and classification. And I had a fair amount of background in language history. And the idea, where should you start? You should start first to collect a lot of words. You compare the vocabulary. Unfortunately, because vocabulary is the most obvious part, okay? If somebody, can you speak, let's say, Spanish? And then they say, well, how do you say? And they give you words, or they try to get you to learn a lot of words. And when languages are really related to each other, it isn't basically, even though, well, many times they have words in common or very similar words in common, but it's very easy to make mistakes if all you have is vocabulary, because vocabulary can change. Not only change pronunciation, which affects the whole of the language, but vocabulary is useful if you want to use it, okay? And vocabulary changes, for instance, many words, you can change their meaning over the years. They also can change their pronunciation along with others and become unrecognizable. And what doesn't change so much is morphology, which is how languages are used, what happens to them. I was mentioning, the verbs in the European languages, or in some languages in California. And in vocabulary, you have quite often, you have words that maybe started as different words, but then become, because of pronunciation changes, some words become the same as others, which means something completely different. If you as a linguist are not aware that all these different things can happen, then you can make big mistakes. Morphology, if the language you're studying has a difficult and a complex verb system, then it doesn't really matter what the word means if it behaves the same as other words of the same type. If you are looking at verbs in languages which have a very complex way of forming verbs, depending on the tense, which is when did things happen, or the person, is it 1, 2, 3, is the person talking, the person being talked about, etc. So you have so many different examples. Okay, if you take in English the so-called strong words, the strong verbs, which are the ones that either don't change at all when you change it from the present to the past, for instance, or the middle of the words change. Okay, and this doesn't happen just with a couple of words. This is going to happen in dozens of verbs. So if you're not sure, well, if you know this is a verb, you can make generalizations, which you can't really do with simple vocabulary. Anyway, Okay. So here is an example, importance of morphology, and this is based on an article I wrote several years ago. It's about plurals of some verbs in Tsimshianic. Now, in Tsimshianic, if you want to make a verb plural, it could be reduplication, meaning you basically repeat the same syllable or something very similar. An example is the verb meaning to cut something, which is chotz in Niska. If you cut more than one thing, or if you slice something, meaning, then you don't say just chotz, you'd say kaskotz, kaskotz. Okay. In English, there is one, at least one, but definitely one verb which reduplicates. It's to cross and to crisscross. You cross the river once. Crisscross the river, you have a number of people are crossing back and forth. So this is reduplication. I won't talk about that because there is no problem really in dealing with that one. But B, with L initial, reduplication is still productive. Productive means you can still make new words by this system. But unproductive means nobody makes new words in that method anymore. So L initial, it means the verbs in the plural, we start with L. So this is not obvious when you start, but I ended up with classifying the L initial plurals. These are all in Niska, but the other languages do the same too. Other Tsimshianic languages. So starting from now and going back into the past, modern, you want to make if you wanted to make another one, you add the prefix le to the stressed singular form. Stress means the heaviest, you're pushing, applying force to that particular place in the world. So modern, add the prefix le to the stressed singular form. So we have already met the word ax, which means water or to drink. As a verb, it means to drink. One person, it's ax. More than one person, they drink, le ax. Okay. Now going a little back into the past, this time you add to the singular form the prefix le. The V means you use a vowel, which is not always the same vowel. But whatever vowel it is, the stress is on the prefix, not on the root of the verb. So in this case, my example is liskit, liskit. This is the plural of scat, which means to be born, like a baby. Liskit. Okay, so what the difference is, you have in one case the modern form, it's always, you adapt the vowel a little bit, but basically, even if you didn't use the still you would be understood. So the axe, liskit. And here, archaic, this is really old, very old. And initial, prevalent forms, they use that instead of having, being part of a prefix, it occurs with verbs which in the singular start with k, g, or h, or y. So what happens there? Here is one of the examples. The word meaning in this case, the word yuk, which means to move. Usually you use it with another things, another element. So yuk starts with here. This is a singular form. The plural is look. So instead of adding L to the word, instead it's as if you're taking off the first, the initial letter of the verb and replace it with L. Another example here, you have a word gimk, meaning to wipe. The plural, link. Okay. What happened to the g? And here's another one. There's, more of just these, not tremendous number, but still enough to see there is a pattern there. Here, I'm sorry, but somehow the last letter there is not, the word is not g, but it's gyo. So it's GY00. I mean, O, gyo. The plural of gyo is not legyo, it's lo. Okay. And it refers to a boat or other movable object to no longer be moving. That's what it is. So this is very strange, very strange. And you can't say, well, it used to be a prefix, and then, well, if it was a prefix, the singular form would still have something else instead of the L. Okay? So let me tell you, this is not obvious to So what I think is that this L used to be a prefix, but in order for it to be a prefix, you cannot have another, you cannot have just got rid of the initial consonant. And then why does it only occur with 4 different consonants? Y, G, H, and K also. So what I think is that there was a prefix. A prefix, I don't know how did we have pronounced this. If you see here, limk, gimk, le, imk, ge, imk, something like that. So if le was a prefix and say imk was the root, what is g? Probably it was also a prefix. And an ordinary word can, in the singular, can start with any consonant. But here, when you have a plural which should have a prefix, the singular must also have had a prefix. And the plural is always with an L, not another consonant. And the singular one, there are only 4 possible consonants. So it doesn't make sense unless the singular consonant, which disappears when you use the L prefix, that the G and others were also prefixes. I don't know meaning what, but I'm sure it was like this. Now, again, these archaic forms are not limited to Tsimshianic. They are also in a number of Penutian languages, such as two languages in California, Tekelma, one of Oregon, and Shidok in the Columbia River. At least there may be a few others that I haven't studied. So why would this happen with the same, not necessarily the same words, but the same consonants that disappear with the N? So I find that it's impossible to say that, oh, this is a coincidence. This cannot be a coincidence. It's so strange. Okay, this pattern is so strange. The fact that you use 4 different consonants, which are all the same, and the plural one is the same too. This can't be a coincidence. It has to be added to other things I have talked about, the ne, senior, kin, etc. Okay, ne as a senior term could be a coincidence. The L initial throughout the 3 periods of the life of the languages, etc. I think it is just the icing on the, maybe not the icing on the cake, but certainly something that cannot be coincidence. So I conclude that the Tsimshianic family is part of the Penutian phylum. It's also a witness to its history. When you see when you just see the L, what happens with the L plural verbs in Tsimshianic, there are quite a few. I don't remember exactly how many there are, but there are maybe around 35. Okay, some of the other languages which seem to have this pattern or remnants of this pattern, you get only a few, very few. So it seems to me that because of Tsimshianic being very isolated, very far from the other Penutian languages, that there must have been other Penutian languages in between. I can't prove it. It's a possibility. And, it's true and historically proven that documented, in the traditions of various people, that they came, say, for instance, from Vancouver Island into the mainland of British Columbia, what happens in such cases, people arrive where there were already people there. So whether they merge together or anyway, other things happen, the incomers, the newcomers, eventually either merge with the locals that were there already, or the locals have to move, etc. And in BC, I don't know about up here, I mean in Alaska, but in BC, you know, there are several places where the oldest language on the coast is people who are still on the westmost, and they're called Wakashan. And then some of the Wakashan moved into the mainland. Okay, now I think this sort of thing happened several times. There must have been other peoples in between the Chinook on the Columbia and the Tsimshianic people where they still are now. Okay, so I repeat my conclusion. The Tsimshianic family is part of the Penutian phylum. And it is an important witness to not only its own history, but the history of the coast. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Tarpent. That was very interesting and a lot of information. We will now take the questions which have been submitted via YouTube. Which are as soon as I can, here we go. We have a comment, Dala Wan from Kitsalas. Somebody appreciated your talk from there. Another comment is, I appreciate that you provide these opportunities for many to showcase their knowledge, expertise, and passions, and for the opportunity to be in the audience. Thank you, Ms. Tarpent, for a great lecture. Speaking other languages is difficult for me, but I find different languages spoken to be quite fascinating. Here's a question. How many languages do you speak, and what piqued your interest in the Tsimshianic language?
How many I speak? It depends what you mean by speaking. If you mean the ones I can carry on a reasonable conversation with, well, my first language is French. You can see I can speak English reasonably well. Otherwise, and well, I can speak Spanish fluently, but I don't know I don't master all the details. Okay, but I can certainly converse. But it isn't perfect or even close to perfect. And otherwise, if you mean what I have learned, it depends also how much you expect me to have learned. Tsimshianic languages, well, in 1977, my husband and I, well, we were both unemployed, looking for some kind of a job. And then we found an ad for someone to work in the Nisra language teaching and revitalization program. This is, up in the Last Valley, not very far from the Panhandle here. So, and at that time, so I was, well, I had a temporary job and he didn't, so I phoned home. I said, listen to this, this is what I just read in the paper, which I was reading during my lunchtime. So he said, oh, it sounds just right for you. I said, what do you mean it sounds just right for you? So we applied. They hired him, and then little by little, they hired me too. And then I ended up working a lot more. So I started to learn the Niskan language with people who were speakers. And it really changed the course of my life. So I didn't, sometimes I've met people that say, oh yeah, well, I chose to study language X because blah, blah, blah. In my case, I didn't choose. Things just happened, but it was really for me a life-changing experience.
Well, thank you. We have another question. Are there any place names in British Columbia or the U.S. Northwest that are of Penutian or specifically Tsimshianic origin?
But Tsimshianic origin, yeah, you have, of course, in the Nass Valley and the Nass, where the Niskra are, and also the Gilsan, there are lots. Is this a person who asked about Kitzilas? Or somebody else? Kitzilas, it's Kitzilas.
I can't tell.
And it means the people of the canyon. And Kitimat, there's Kitimat, which is a small town on the coast. And this means the people of the snow. There's always a lot of snow there. I mean, every winter.
Yeah.
And a number of them. That's, if you want, especially the Tsimshianic, it has to be in the place that the speakers live.
Might there be an opportunity to have fluent Tsimshianic speakers meet with the California and Oregon speakers?
Which ones?
The fluent Tsimshianic speakers.
Oh, Samantha.
Yeah, meet with California and Oregon speakers. I think they mean the Penutian speakers. I'm not sure.
Well, it would be Penutian speakers probably from there. They would probably be disappointed by how different the languages would be. You see, this is not, if it was obvious that these languages were related to each other, then people would know already. Okay? Like if you take Spanish and Italian, well, they're so close. you don't have to have studied linguistics to know that these languages are very similar, and if you know one, it's not too hard to learn the other one. But among the Penutians, within the individual families like Tsimshianic, you have a lot of similarity, but beyond the, if you go out of each family, it is not obvious that they might be related.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Tarpent. We really
Oh, I'm very
appreciate
glad.
your talk. And SHI invites viewers to return to our next lecture by Dr. Marianne Ignace, entitled The Haida Language, Origins, External Relationships, and Language Contact Through the Lenses of Linguistics, Other Sciences, and Oral Histories, which will be broadcast on Tuesday, February 9th at noon. We have a link below the YouTube video for a survey we hope you will take a moment to complete. This will help us to continue improving our lecture series and allow our funders to measure the impact of the program. Thank you again very much, and we'll see you all on Tuesday.